Culture is defined as the sum total of ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. Globalization is defined by Thomas Friedman as the total integration of everything with everything else, while Westernization is the influence of ideas, customs, and practices characteristic of the Occident or the Western U.S. Westernization and globalization is causing the flattening of global culture and the loss of some global diversity for indigenous tribes across the globe. However, the Western world underestimates the ability of indigenous societies to survive through their adaptability to use Western advances to their advantage. Indigenous people and their culture have and can continue to survive by adapting to global changes by finding balance between rejection of some Western influence while incorporating other advantageous aspects of globalization into their lives. The Western ideals of commercialization and consumerism are infiltrating indigenous cultures around the world. For example, the Teotihuacan Walmart opened its doors in 2005. It stands within view of the majestic pyramids of Teotihuacan. Xenia Marquez of Mexico City protests, "What a horror! Quetzalcoatl would be furious." Yet on opening day, there were 70 customers in line before 9 a.m. Before Walmart, local street markets and family-owned businesses thrived. These represented Mexican traditions and showed its culture, as Miguel Angel Nieves describes. However, the Western ideals of cheap and accessible goods overpower parts of Mexican culture. Furthermore, the influx of technological advances that allow the easy spread of information and ideas help the distribution of Western culture around the world that affect the traditions of native societies. Recently, television and internet are used to disseminate views and Western values. However, television and internet are also used by indigenous cultures to spread the ideas of their cultures and keep them alive and strong.
I think that you could argue that in anywhere in the world, the spread of television does sort of collapse cultural differences. That said, video technology, can really be a way to preserve and spread cultures. It doesn't have to necessarily collapse things.
Although globalization and Westernization are somewhat flattening certain aspects of indigenous cultures, there are indigenous cultures that have withstood this flattening effect and keep their rich cultures and traditions alive, and additionally have used technological advances and Western ideas to spread and allow their cultures to continue.
It's a tool. You get to connect with people in different cultures in different parts of the world. So if you're sitting in a very isolated place, Timbuktu in Mali, and you can jump on the web, and you can jump on YouTube, and you can check out what's happening in the rest of the world. It's not a threat. We don't think so. Again, we underestimate human beings.
Immigrant indigenous communities in the United States maintain economic exchange and social relationships with the communities in Mexico through internet. Also, digital cameras allow members of the community in Mexico to record rituals and festivities. These videos are sent to their families and friends who reside in the United States in order for them to reproduce and recreate these experiences. Cultural and traditional events such as El Tajín in Veracruz and the Day of the Dead in Pátzcuaro, Michoacán, have a high demand from Mexican and foreign visitors due to massive broadcasting.
States Alejandro Gonzalez of the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City.
Where they're indigenous peoples who are very much, trying to restore and maintain traditional cultures. You see this in upstate New York and among the Iroquois. You see it in the Southwest among the Navajo. You can go to Acoma Pueblo, the longest continuous settled place in the continental United States. People have lived there for 1,000 years in Acoma Pueblo. Right? I mean, these are communities which are still going. They thrive in communities. Sometimes they're struggling communities, but they're there, and they found ways to accommodate to the modern world.
The Kuna have a long history of foreign influence. Originally from the Gulf of Urabá in Colombia, they left after violent encounters with the Spanish. In 1903, Panama became an independent nation with a new government. A national culture was forced upon the indigenous people by the government. This was often enforced with violence. After years of abuse, the Kuna staged a brief, successful revolution on February 25, 1925, after attacking the station police on multiple islands of Kuna Yala. Before the Kuna could negotiate for autonomy, they reached out for the U.S. for legal help. Globalization and increased communication among the Kuna and other countries allowed the legal guidance of the U.S. to reach the Kuna and aid in their quest for autonomy.
So you could ask an abstract question, is globalization good or bad, and you could come to a, obviously I think I'm leaning towards bad, which wasn't really where I thought I was going to be going, but you could say that. But at the same time, you can sort of come around and realize that it's not an either or, that human societies evolve and that people have to make accommodations, all people have to make accommodations all the time.
One area where the Kuna have benefited from increased foreign contact is economically through mullah trade. While the Kuna remain very independent people, politically and socially, their economy is very reliant on global trade and tourism. While thousands of foreigners descend upon Kuna every year, the Kuna still retain their birthright traditions and autonomous culture, although some change has occurred. The newly introduced commercialization of the mullahs has brought the Kuna into the Western world. This has exposed all of the people, especially the women, to Western cultures and ideals. Many now wear Western clothes and attend universities in hopes of one day finding a job in a city such as Panama. For example, a woman named Reina, who made mullahs and sold them for a living, had 2 daughters. Instead of the traditional way of both being raised with the tribe and going through all the female ceremonies, one decided to stay in school, wear Western clothing, and pursue an education. The other girl did decide to follow in the footsteps of women before her and went through the 3-day haircutting ceremony, while only a 1-day puberty ceremony was held for her sister. Globalization promotes integration and the removal not only of cultural barriers, but many of the negative dimensions of culture. Globalization is a vital step toward both a more stable world and better lives for the people within it.
I don't think indigenous peoples are going to disappear no matter what globalization brings next. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that if you study these peoples, you find a sense of adaptability, an eagerness to survive, to keep cultures alive. And it seems to me that there are great efforts to keep those cultures alive.
Alejandro Gonzalez of the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City states,
"It is a failure to think that the process homogenizes cultures around the globe. This process will contribute to the loss of certain cultural traits but will reinforce others."
And I think that underestimates the power of culture, that there really is an exchange. You can go to China and you can see hip-hop music in China. You can go to India and you can see hip-hop music. You can go to Palestine and see Arab, but it's not the same. You still have the local flavor. So I don't think, I think sometimes we make a little bit much of ourselves, as if we're just going to Americanize the world. But there's a healthy exchange.
The Kuna are one of many indigenous peoples who are incorporating a balance of Western influence into their social and economic operations. It is apparent indigenous tribes are learning to play the game, using foreign legal aid, opening its doors to global tourism, and utilizing internet and television to spread ideas. Because of this adaptation, we can be sure cultural traditions of indigenous people will not be lost to globalization or westernization.